Thanks for joining us today. My name is Mark. I'm a bookseller here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. I'd like to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting powells.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, I think. Or you can sign up for our events email at powells.com. Oh, somebody, is it in the US Virgin Islands? I think that's as far away as you can get, isn't it? Can anybody beat that? Tonight, we are delighted to welcome Nell Zink in conversation with Justin Taylor. Nell Zink's books include The Wall Creeper, Private Novelist, Nicotine, Doxology, and Mislaid, which was longlisted for the National Book Award. Her writing has appeared in several publications, including Granta and Harper's Magazine. She's here today with her newest book, Avalon. Patrick Condon, writing in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, says of Avalon, Zink lovingly lampoons the way that teenagers bumble toward identity and character, a light-footed Cinderella story that documents a young woman's rise from a wretched existence in stylish, witty fashion. Lynn Sigerstrong, writing in the LA Times, says, it is incredibly pleasing to see a writer this intelligent keep the focus of her gaze this tight. There are also long stretches of satisfying narrative of humanity and pain. The concrete descriptions of California are continually stunning and add a further layer of life. Avalon ended up for me feeling like art. And Molly Young, writing in the New York Times, says Avalon is effulgent and clever, a zone of mirth and meaning. What fun. And I just read that one so I could say effulgent on the event. Joining Nell in conversation, we are delighted to welcome friend of Powell's Books, Justin Taylor. Justin's most recent book, the memoir Riding with the Ghost, was named one of the best books of the year by Kirkus Reviews. And it was praised by the great novelist Lauren Groff, who says, Justin Taylor's relentless, peripatetic, and tender search for reconciliation with his late troubled father blooms into a full-throated song of joy about his own life lived through music, teaching, travel, and literature. This event includes a Q&A, so as well as the chat button, if you look for Q&A, write your question in there. If someone's already written a question you'd like to hear the answer to, you can give that question a thumbs up. That upvotes it, puts it to the top of the list. That's enough from me. Please put your hands together in your little bubbles for Nell Zink and Justin Taylor.
All right, thank you. Thank you everybody for coming. It is a great pleasure to be here and to be in conversation with Nell. We'll get right into the chatting, and then after Nell and I talk for a little bit, we'll get hopefully some questions from you guys. But just sort of by way of brief introduction, I just want to say I've known Nell for 7 years now. We met at the Miami International Book Festival in 2015, somewhat randomly, with a bunch of other writers. We all ended up at a table at the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company in South, just south of where the Miami Book Festival is. And we just hit it off and kept in touch. I think I was already a fan of her first novel, which at the time was The New Book, maybe the only book, or maybe this was when Mislaid had just come out. I don't even remember. But she's written 4 or 5 novels since then, and I've just loved every single one. And I could talk at some length, and suppose maybe I will, about why some of that is. But about the new book, I just want to say, I read it a few months ago and I just reread it this week, getting ready for this event. And I think that word that came up a couple times in the introduction, effulgent, is really true. Nell is one of the sharpest, smartest, and funniest writers working today. And it's always kind of an awe-inspiring thing to behold that. But if I had to pick one thing that I really feel like sets Avalon apart, and I don't mean this to denigrate the other books in any way, there's a real warmth to Avalon. There's an incredible, I think, tenderness and brightness, and it's just absolutely a joy to spend time in this world, even when it is chaotic and dark and and whatever else is going on in there. And so I'm dying to hear about how this book got to be and a million other things. So Nell, how you doing?
Fine, thank you. And I just want to say I'm very happy to be talking to Justin because I've been a fan of his since I met him and started reading his work, especially his novel, The Gospel of Anarchy. Just think, to my mind, you, Justin, are someone with the potential to do very great things if, assuming you find the time. So let's just hope you find the time. And thanks very much for the compliments on my books. And I don't think that table at the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company was random. I think we got roped into going there by Christian Lawrence, and he was like herding people towards this really nightmarish kind of restaurant there on the waterfront. But it was a great night for me because I met people, and living where I do in the sticks, deep in the woods, in not in a suburb of Berlin, but like an hour from the city by train. It's meeting an American writer is always a treat, even if it's not you, and if it's you, it's even better. The Origins of Avalon, that's what you're curious about?
It's one of the things that I'm curious about. I felt like from Mislaid to Nicotine to Doxology, I think those novels, each one was maybe a little bit bigger than the last, and Doxology in particular, I think of as a kind of panoramic novel in its way. It's a large cast, it covers a lot of time, and
yes.
And this book, I don't want to use the word narrower because that's not right, but there is a real focus, I feel like, to Avalon. And I think it gets a lot of its velocity from that sense of focus and from Bran, the narrator, how she's kind of always moving and what she's trying to get into or out of. And so, yeah, I would love to hear you talk about how you came to write this book or how it emerged out of what the kind of work you've been doing for the last few.
Well, most of Nicotine, my novel Nicotine, takes place in a short time period, but it's not hard for me since I tend to write in a fast-paced way. I can find myself covering 30 years in 2 paragraphs. This is, not a painful process, and so I wanted to do. To take the events, and it's kind of, in a sense, in a weird way, it's autofiction, deeply encoded autofiction, taken very, like alienated from itself, very carefully, and then put back together to be a story about a much shorter time period than the events that influenced me to write it. Because I've known someone who has a certain amount in common with this love interest in the novel for about 20 years. And so that's why, if I think about how long this novel has been like germinating in my mind, instead of my usual like, oh yeah, it was 3 weeks, I really do think 20 years. It took me 20 years to get my head around the complexity, the sort of paradoxical, contradictory nature of the stuff going on in this person's head, and to turn that into a fiction that conveys what I want to say about it in a way that might be comprehensible to other people.
That makes so much sense to me, and I was so happy to hear you say that idea of deeply encoded autofiction. Honestly, that was when I read it the first time. When I finished it and put it down, I don't remember who I said this to. It might have been my wife, might have been somebody else. But I said, this is Nell's most personal novel in a way I cannot put a finger on. It's all the main characters are teenagers in the 2010s, and they're all in a part of California where I know she did not spend a lot of time. I mean, I know you're from there, but like it was so removed, and I was like, this is her most personal book. It feels like a memoir in some way, and I think that maybe a sense of where that sense of I don't know, that warmth is maybe coming from. There's so much affection for these people and this place, and I'm not going to ask you to try and decode the field of autofictive referent. I mean, it's so beside the point anyway, but it does come through. It really, truly does.
Well, in my defense, and that's one of the things that's encoded there. I've gotten a lot of compliments. Like I did this podcast for the LARB, and they were like, you so completely captured the essence of Torrance, California. You know, I was born near LA, and more relevantly, my Uncle Charlie lived there until his rather recent death. And he had been exploited and manipulated by an evil crime family. So that was an element that was working in the background. This idea of being like a helpless pawn, like just a leaf floating on a stream of some kind of organized crime thing. Though I don't go into details about the criminality of the people in the book, because there's enough of that in media. God knows. I mean, I don't have to tell anybody what a drug dealing biker gang is like. They just have to like walk over to their computer and turn it on, and Netflix will immediately start telling them about drug dealers. Like, why should I bother? I cannot bring the news about drug dealers.
Yeah. But I can. On the 20th anniversary of The Wire, I mean, the burden is off the novel to kind of teach us that lesson.
Yes, I would say, and Breaking Bad and all these things that I have not seen, and have no intention of seeing. As in, I have good friends who have shown me, attempted to show me episodes where they'll just say, well, nothing bad happens in this episode, Nell. You can handle this. And in the very first scene, someone like walks into a room, walks up to a guy, puts a gun to his head, pulls the trigger, and he falls down dead. And my friends will be like, well, it's only a little tiny hole. They don't show the exit wound. What are you upset about? like no.
Right. It's only stochastic terror and jaded violence. What's your problem?
Exactly. So I mean, that kind of experience also strongly influences the content of this novel, with its focus on the dystopian aesthetic of popular entertainment, and the sort of scheme I set up, maybe on a meta level, where the novel itself is initially dystopian and is about Bran's this protagonist's struggle. This young woman, is initially like a high school girl. Her struggle to have a life that's not, ready for prime time.
Yeah. Well, on that note, actually, I mean, I guess we're already starting to get into it, but should we step back a second and tell people kind of what the novel is about? I mean,
possibly.
It's such a cursed question, but I'm going to put it to you anyway. What would you say this novel is about?
About that? That's a cursed question, but it is about a girl who has been abandoned by her mother and her father. Her father when she's a baby, a more typical kind of thing, and her mother is just a miserably unhappy person who gets into Tibetan Buddhism, and leaves Bran alone with her stepfather and stepbrother, so that she can go to a Buddhist monastery in the Sierras and be a nun, and where she dies, possibly because she's not getting the very best preventive health care as a penniless Buddhist nun. And so by the time Bran is 15 or so, she doesn't have parents, and the place where she lives is a tree nursery where there's a whole lot of work to be done, a lot of unskilled labor that can be done by a child. And so that's, that's how her stepfamily sees her, as just a source of hands that can do work with the plants. And so she's very lonely, very unhappy, and pretty sure that she has the potential to have a somewhat better life, but she's just pathologically shy and inarticulate and does not speak up ever. And when she meets through a friend, she has one friend at school, this very unpopular gay kid from a family with money named Jay. And when Jay goes off to college, he comes home like at the first chance he gets with a guy from Maine who is just really eccentric and probably and rather shy himself, but he gloms onto Bran the way some guys will if they're very shy and they see, oh wait, here's a pretty girl, but she's terrified of the world. Well, if I can be nice enough to her, she won't be terrified of me, and then I'll have a monopoly on this girl, because nobody else is ever going to notice that she's pretty because she's so scared. It's not an evil thing for him to do, but he does it. And she just falls for him like a ton of bricks. And because she recognizes that she has something to gain. I mean, he's not, on a, she has kind of a one-way ticket to nowhere. And he's someone who's very ambitious about rising in the world, rising socially, rising financially, becoming he wants to be a top college professor. He has it all mapped out. And she thinks, well, can I hitch my wagon to this star? And almost immediately finds out, nope, I can't. But he's not willing to let her drop. So, okay, that's the opening situation.
That sounds right to me, and thank you for bearing with that. And so then I want to talk about this character of Peter a little bit, who emerges. You called him the love interest. I think that's right, and really emerges as Bran's main focus of attention, and a lot of the energy of the novel, particularly in the second half, comes from their back and forth and the ways in which they understand or misunderstand each other. And it was so interesting to hear you talk about that, because there is something transactional about maybe their relationship, to the extent that they each want something from the other, and yet there's a real innocence to it. And it felt to me anyway that the main thing that keeps drawing them together is they're able to keep taking each other very seriously, in a world where very few other people will. So I don't want to create the impression in the audience, if you haven't read the book yet, that they're like some lesser Jane Austen couple that gets sentenced to a bad marriage in the last 5 pages or something, like
No.
that has to marry the priest and whatever. Like it's not like that at all. I mean, it's really whatever the relationship is or isn't, or however it evolves, it always feels like they're very well matched, despite not precisely being equals. That wasn't really a question, but maybe you want to say something about it.
It just reminds me of how the reviews have all been almost all of them have been mutually exclusive, as if this novel is some kind of Rorschach blot.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying they're well matched. That's a new one. I mean, of course, I think that, because this is, as I said, this is autofiction about one of the great love stories of our time. But it has to be encoded. So.
Right. Well, I mean, Bran is economically disadvantaged, as they say, and she's never gotten beyond high school, so her set of references is pretty limited in a lot of ways, particularly in relation to her friend group who are all going to either Ivy League or, big schools in California. And I think to me, a lot of the saddest parts of the book are watching that fellowship of this band of outsiders kind of break apart as the ones with money and access figure out how to assimilate into the middle class, or to speak the language of academe, and Bran is really left out of all that. But the thing about Peter, I feel like, is that he, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but he is the one that keeps returning to her. He likes her anyway, and although he's prone to soliloquizing about whatever he's been reading, Bran is not. She does not feel to me powerless or manipulated, or maybe most importantly, she doesn't feel bored. Although she elides a lot of his longer speeches for our benefit, she herself seems pretty interested in what he has to say. Is that fair?
Well, he focuses intensely on people when he deals with them at all. So that just if he, he has another friend who doesn't actually have any lines in the book, but who's a recurring reference, this older failed grad student who's trying to write an epic poem, and Peter will listen to him talk about the epic poem, and he's the only person one can imagine very easily who has ever listened to this guy talk about his epic poem. And I mean, he probably loves Peter too. I just didn't make him a character in the book. Because people who are really intensely interested in the world around them, it can be unbelievably seductive if they turn that little spotlight onto you. However briefly, it's like being hypnotized.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And to your point, one of the other main characters in the book, which is Bran's friend Jay, through whom she meets Peter, Jay is also in love with Peter, and so there's this constant push-pull between Bran and Jay about sort of who has priority of access to this intense attention that Peter is capable of paying.
I mean, Jay is a flamenco dancer, but this is partly in tribute to my Uncle Charlie, who was a flamenco guitarist. And I even, a dancer that Charlie worked with a lot, figures in the novel as Jay's teacher. And she really did have a driver's license, a grandfathered California driver's license that allowed her to drive while legally blind. She had this thing on that she could screw onto her glasses, like a little tiny telescope that allowed her to sort of scan the road.
Well, let me ask you this. So the novel is called Avalon, and this is a motif that pops up kind of all over the book, right? There's an Avalon Island that's just off the coast of California where Bran goes on a day trip at some point, and then there's the historico-mythico Avalon that out of the Legend of Arthur, and this comes up in a number of times throughout the book, and I wanted to ask about that because I was just curious where that came from for you, and why you gave that to Bran. As I said earlier, Bran is someone with a lot of native intelligence, although that shyness often keeps her from pursuing her ambitions. So she hasn't read very much because she hasn't had the chance, but she owns a handful of these books that were left over from her parents, right? And
her mother who became a Buddhist nun before she discovered the Dalai Lama, she read fantasy novels,
right?
These high fantasy novels about Arthurian legend, and I didn't include Marion Zimmer Bradley, partly because I've never read Marion Zimmer Bradley, but Lloyd Alexander, and she the the values conveyed in those books, the value of sort of that chivalry and nobility that you can win because you have the strength of 10 because your heart is pure. That's something that gives her like the psychological strength to go on, but the question is to go on in what direction. She's always thinking of how she can become stronger and live through more intense deprivation and make do with even less, because she's just not materialistic. She's been unable to develop any kind of materialism, and it's partly because in these books that she loves so much, they have a kind of Gnostic feel to them. At least if you read them, you know, in 21st century America, it's like you're reading about a parallel universe that's a better place, and this better place is so often in myth. It's in European myth, it's an island that's off to the west somewhere.
Right.
You know, the island you can sail to into the setting sun. And you know, if you look west from Long Beach, you know, one of the Channel Islands, I guess, is Santa Catalina, and there's this town called Avalon. So it's very real to her from childhood.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about it again because there's that wonderful, it's a very short scene, maybe about 3/4 of the way through, where she's looking at the books that she owns, and there's 4 of them. It's the Once and Future King, the Crystal Cave, the High King, all of which she's gotten from her mother, and then a copy of Adorno's Minima Moralia that she's gotten from Peter, I think. I was looking at that as like, that's the library, you know, everything she's going to get out of this world has to come out of these books. So I wondered if you wanted to say anything about any of those in particular. If those, you know, I assume that some care went into selecting those titles of all the ones you could have chosen.
You know, I think the care that went into them, it's a bit abstract simply because I read those books when I was small. I mean, when I read Lloyd Alexander, I was still in California. I remember reading Lloyd Alexander, which means I was not yet 8 years old. I must have been 6 or 7, and it was so real to me. And I mean, I remember when I was not even remotely adolescent, but just like getting old enough so that pretend games were no longer completely vividly real to me, like mourning as a child, how I could no longer completely become lost in the dream world of a book I was reading. And The Crystal Cave was another one that I read when I was a little older, and was completely captivated by this figure of Merlin. And I haven't read it since then because you know, when I pick up these books now, they you know, they're not really for grown-ups. I don't think. Do not want to hurt anyone's feelings, but to me, there's one high fantasy novel that I don't talk about in Avalon at all, partly because it thematically doesn't fit at all. I'm not saying high fantasy is not for grown-ups, because I think The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany might be my favorite book in the world. But Minima Moralia is just something that's autofictional, I would say. You know, it's taken straight from life, and the minute I wrote it into the book, I began to notice it everywhere. So that serendipity thing, where suddenly suddenly you're reading an interview with some author online, and they're talking about this book. So I guess it's having a moment.
Yeah, no, I think so. That totally makes sense to me. I want to just briefly remind everyone that if you have questions, please do use that Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom box. I'm sure everyone is well versed enough at this point to know where that is. This would be a great time to start queuing those up, because I would love to be able to throw some of your questions to Nell starting in the next, few minutes or whenever.
Yeah.
So please don't be shy. But in the meantime, so when we were chatting before this started, I had kind of threatened some craft questions, and I don't know. I mean, I'm getting into my like creative writing teacher mode, because that's what my summer is going to look like. So I don't want to bug you too much with it, but I am curious to know a little bit, what was writing this book like? Was this voice kind of ready to roll from the beginning? Did you have a sense of where things were headed? Did you feel like you were kind of learning as you went? What was actually, like, literally actually composing this text over however many weeks or months it was? What was that like?
Well, what I do a lot of visualization, because I'm a pretty verbal person, and if I just start writing, I begin channeling language, then it will come out in a voice that's perfectly articulate, but it doesn't have an air of reality. And so I constantly stop to visualize, okay, who is this character? What are her surroundings like? What is her body like? What can I really imagine her saying? So there are a lot of things Bran could think and say about her situation that she doesn't, because she's Bran, she's not me. There's a certain, obviously there's some overlap. It's not like I was writing about an Inuit boy in the 1850s. She's a woman. She's young. She's alive now. I'm not young, but I was once. I vaguely remember what it was like. So it's a character I could inhabit. And then, of course, because she's young now rather than being young in the 70s, I had to visualize young women I know, people who really are 21, and think of how they react, how they behave, their kind of shyness, and especially the intense privacy that I've gotten to know with a lot of very young people who simply because so much of their contacts are in their phone, or not even known to their other friends. They compartmentalize a lot. They're very they live very much like urban people used to live, even if they live in the middle of nowhere. There was a lot to think about. So I just, thought about it and started writing. I mean, I think she follows like it's the Star of Bethlehem. She's following this guy for a lot of the book. So this relation between the two of them was central to the structure.
No, that totally makes sense. Did you feel like this novel came quickly relative to some of the others, or was it a little?
No, writing doxology was hard work and took years because it's so long and so complex. And this one, simply because the story is linear or circular, it didn't take years. It was more like 6 months. It was something reasonable. I have a reputation for writing really fast, but as I've been repeating in interviews, I feel like over and over lately, that's just because I didn't get an MFA, so I didn't know how you're supposed to talk about how fast you write. And I had a really a seminal experience at the American Academy, like a few months ago. Rebecca Ruckeiser, who lives in Berlin, she has a novel coming out. She got me invited to have dinner with the head of the Iowa Writers Workshop, who started to talk about her writing process. And it turned out this process involved an awful lot of knitting. Like, and I thought, so that's how you take 10 years to write a novel. If the process of writing involves knitting, you know, it's gonna take a while. So, but my impression is that most writers write exactly the way I do. When they get, they plan, they make notes, they draft, and then when they get 3 weeks, a chunk of time that's 3 or 4 weeks long, where they think they can crank out a draft, they sit and do it. So.
Yeah,
I don't know.
that makes sense to me. I mean, especially as I've gotten older, I like to procrastinate as long as humanly possible. And then when the pressure is just absolutely unbearable and I'm making everyone around me miserable, I sit down and just write it out. And it's not perfect, but it's a lot closer to whole than you would necessarily want to admit, because it's just had so much time to simmer, boil, or whatever analogy you want to use. And so you wind up saying these things to people who are like, well, I wrote the manuscript in 6 weeks or possibly in 9 years. You can decide
exactly
what to tell you.
No, but the thing you learn at Iowa is say 9 years. Just say it. Don't be shy.
Yeah, you don't have to tell them about the knitting. You just say 9 years.
Exactly.
Yeah. What were you gonna say?
Oh, I was thinking I should congratulate you, but I don't know if I should congratulate you publicly.
Oh no, I actually don't think you should just yet, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Justin may or may not have written a book, possibly, maybe.
Yeah. That's about the long and short of it. There's actually some chance it'll be in the trades tomorrow. I don't know, but we definitely don't say any names and get me yelled at by very well-meaning publicists who are doing their best. We don't want to undermine them here, but thank you. So I guess another thing that I wanted to talk about, I just read this wonderful interview that you did with Lisa Borst of N+1, that's in the current issue of Book Forum, and people who are listening tonight should definitely go check this out. It's up online. You can go read it right now, in fact, although wait until the event is over.
I think my anecdote about the knitting is in that interview. Sorry.
Oh yeah, that's true. Don't read that part. But I want to talk about what you were talking about at the beginning, which I guess you and I touched on a little bit too, which is this idea that a lot of the characters in Avalon are trying to make art that goes against the grain of what Lisa calls fascist artistic tendencies, and then you go on to say, it's very hard these days to get people to pay attention to anything that's not somehow violent and exploitative and dystopian. And that really resonated deeply with me. I think that's true. I worry sometimes that in our zeal to be politically savvy and to levy critiques and to be, sophisticated, angry leftists and whatever else, we sometimes really do end up fetishizing the very same darkness, violence, nihilism that we're ostensibly critiquing or acting against. And I think one of the great virtues of Avalon is that it breaks out of that binary by mostly just refusing to engage. It says, I'm not going to show you the things I don't want to show you. And so I don't know, I'm kind of answering my own question and talking over it. But I guess what I want to, I would love to just hear you say a little bit more about this and your own thinking kind of around these ideas.
Well, I don't think of it as something new. I think of it as something like a basic fact about human beings. And I don't want to overgeneralize too much talking about human beings, but I think when there's danger, when there's something bad happening, you look.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you might then avert your eyes and run away, but your first impulse is to look, to know, you know, what's going wrong. And I think a lot of entertainment media, having a coughing fit would not be helpful. Sorry. What am I saying? I mean, if you watch a movie, like a lot of classic movies, or if you read a novel that's very well done, if you start to, you know, take a step back and look at what's happening, you realize every single scene or every single paragraph contains something that is there to offend your sense of what's right and proper. You know, even if it's just you know, something that's a little too sexy, you know, you look. This coughing thing's got to go. Okay, I made instant decaf. Maybe that was just a really bad idea. Instant decaf. It's probably killing me right now, as we speak. And I think you know, that tradition where in a classic movie, it might just be that you see a woman talking to a man where you think, oh no, this can't end well. Is that the right kind of man for her to be talking to? Well, you know, these days we're not so easily shocked, for one, and there's not a lot of propriety to draw on for people creating these entertainment media. They have to go for the lowest common denominator, and the lowest common denominator is that you blast people to bits with weapons, and that will get you eyeballs. You have sexualized violence, and people look, and you embed it into a story that's ostensibly about something completely different. But what people are actually watching, if you subtract the narrative and just think about what are my eyeballs seeing on this screen, and it's you know, just a long series of sex crimes. And you know, I don't particularly think that's good for people. You know, not necessarily because it makes them go out and commit sex crimes. It's because it makes them fearful and conservative.
Yeah.
Because you just get this feeling that that's what the world is like. And you know, for most of us, we're like, you know, the poser rappers in 8 Mile or something, you know, kind of pretending to be from the hood, you know, pretending we lead these harsh lives of danger and adventure, when it's not necessarily the case, and yet the media we consume are so conducive to political reaction, in my opinion. And so what I have, what Bran does in the novel, under the influence of her friend Peter, is to try to develop an alternative to that, under Peter's influence, while at the same time Peter is telling her, but don't do this, because if you do, you'll never sell anything and you won't be financially independent. You know, because mixed messages are his brand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's some very specific. There's some actually some satirical moments. For example, that she writes a dystopian screenplay about aliens destroying Earth, and the leader of the last remaining humans says, "Death absolute is the truth of our existence as a whole." You know who that's a quote from?
I don't, unless it's the minimum.
Zadie Smith. Zadie Smith. In an essay that she published about COVID.
Oh, wow. That's really funny. No, I assumed it was the minimum morale, honestly.
No.
But that's so funny. I mean, and I understand what you're saying, because I think this novel, at its structural level, has that, you know, it has that same set of values that these characters have. I mean, we were talking before about the bike gang, which is, you know, in one sense Bran's quasi-adoptive family, and in this other sense, really her chief antagonists. I mean, they're really her abusers and exploiters, and their menace kind of ebbs and flows throughout the book depending what else is going on. But by the end, I think you have a sense of real menace. I mean, you see the full scale of what these people are capable of and what they really want, and it's, you know, and it's not nice, but the novel does such a wonderful job of showing that and telling its story without ceding its own values to its own antagonist. They don't get the chance to like vamp and do the supervillain speech and, you know, blow up
No.
you know, a couple of planets or whatever, you know, whatever you get in the superhero movie where, you know, the bad guy's having all the fun, and then at the, you know, finally we get around to like paying lip service to some idea of whatever the guy in the, you know, red, white, and blue underwear wants. Like, oh, okay, now we can say that's more important. So I love that people do that. You know, it stands by the conviction that it has.
Thank you. Thanks. Nice to hear. I feel like it might be question time. Are there any questions?
There are no questions in the queue yet. We've got a great audience here. People are tuned in. They're listening, but they are uninclined to ask us anything. So I will say to them again. We've got about 10 minutes left. This is the time. Please do go for it. Nell would love to talk to you. I would also be happy to talk to you. So if it's been on your mind, yeah, pop in. And then while we're waiting to see if some audience questions roll in, maybe I'll just ask you one more cursed question that you don't have to answer if you don't want to. But what are you working on now? Anything that you are willing to or able to talk about?
I'm still thinking what I'm going to do next. I'm still in the thinking about it phase.
Fair enough.
There will be another book because I have a 2-book deal. So
there you go. So the best way to get the book written is to have already spent the money. then you know at least you'll write something.
Yes, I mean, that's not a strain for me. I mean, knowing I have a novel due, sort of like, literally, if they told me I had to turn it in a month from now, I could have a draft, but I have until like 2024. So I'm not really stressing myself here.
Yeah. Oh, we've got a question. This is anonymous attendee says, "Hi Nell, in terms of media consumption, novels versus TV, and the economy of attention, how do you find yourself affected by attention and distraction at the actual act of writing yourself?" I think they're asking, are you able to feel attentive and focused like when you're sitting down to write, or do you find that this kind of culture of distraction is maybe sometimes keeping you from the page or from sitting at the desk as long as you should?
I mean, I have maybe an advantage or a disadvantage, which is that I have a total one-track mind. And I can concentrate really well. Just, I don't know why that is, but just, you know, I'm very capable of, you know, putting something on the stove, sitting down to write, and then realizing an hour later that it's now black and on fire. This is, distraction is not a huge problem for me. I think I will get tempted to like take a break and check and see if I have any exciting new emails. But fortunately, I only get like 4 emails a day. Whenever I get emails about work, like people wanting me to blurb something, they often start with this sort of apologetic, like, oh, you must get 1,000 of these requests every week, and I'm so sorry to disturb you. It's like, no, I get one every 3 months. So, and I don't watch streaming TV. I don't subscribe to any of those services. I save them up for when I'm visiting my pal Fred, who's just a connoisseur and really into them. So he watches them all, and then he figures out which ones I might like. And so, for example, a couple of weeks ago, I went to see him in Munich, and in the space of a week, we watched 2 seasons of Emily in Paris. And it was just really delightful. But it didn't distract me from anything, because it was just the thing we did in the evenings after running around Munich.
Here's another question. This is from Jason. Jason says, "Hi Nell, how has living in Germany affected your perspective on writing about the US, if at all?"
It has greatly affected it, and one of the main things I would say, because I've been here, you know, I've been outside the US, because I moved to Israel before I was in Germany. I moved at the end of '96, and I moved to Germany in 2000. And one thing that I think, one switch that flipped, and I'll never be able to switch it back, is that I perceive America as the new world. To my mind, America, which I used to think of it as sort of a suburb of England, you know, because of the language and the culture, especially, you know, it's hard for people now to imagine, but when I was 12 years old, the percentage of immigrants in the United States was the lowest it had ever been. 1975, 5% of people in the United States had been born outside the country. And it was like just heavily Anglo-Saxon. You know, this was a real thing. You know, it's not something people make up. And then and now that, you know, demographically the country has changed so much, but back then I thought of it as there sort of being a chain that linked the sort of the West Coast to the Midwest to places like Boston to London. And now I just think America is like Brazil. America is like Argentina. It's a colony that is, you know, a very recent, something that was founded very recently, you know, as everyone realizes at this point. You know, this was not such a big topic of discussion in my youth, but, you know, just the reality of colonialism, just how brutal that was. I mean, it's hard to imagine probably, but the first time I heard someone say that we'd practiced genocide against the Native Americans, that was an East German historian. You know, I was in Berlin, and a guy who had been educated in East Germany told me what America had done to the Indians. And I was like, oh shit, God, you're right. But that is not how it was framed back then. So, so I'm very conscious of being, especially when you've spent time in the Middle East, where things really are ancient, and even here, in southwestern Germany, there have been, people for 40,000 years, and not to mention Africa, where I've also been at this point, where there have been people for as long as there have been people. North America just seems very fresh and, a work in progress.
Yeah, that makes some sense to me. I'm going to make one last call for questions, if anybody has them. There is still time to get in there, although increasingly less time. So take your shot if you're going to, and maybe I'll ask. And we should be conscious too. It's almost got to be, what is it, 3 o'clock in the morning where you are now?
Yes, in fact, it is 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yes, Nell came into us live for an event that started at 2 a.m. her time. So maybe I'll just ask one more while I wait and see if the audience is going to ask another. Is there anything that you're reading right now that you're excited about, that you want to recommend, new, old, first time favorites, whatever?
I'm reading really incredible galley. I mean, I've gone public about it. There's a letter from me, like in the front of this galley, by Robert Perisic, a Croatian writer, Perisic, called "A Cat at the End of the World." It's just really wonderful, but I think it's coming out in November. That's the problem with writers, is we're always reading stuff you can't buy. People are always asking us to read stuff you cannot buy. So, however, for Christmas, people think about A Cat at the End of the World. At least the title is easy to spell.
It's a memorable title. That's good. All right. Well, I think we do not have another question. So I think that maybe we'll end on that note. I don't know if our faithful interlocutor hosts are going to pop back on. There they come.
Hi.
But no, this was just such an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for asking me to do this with you. Everybody, you can buy this now. You don't have to wait for Christmas.
True.
To be a summer present to yourself.
Yeah, thank you for doing that, Justin. That was wonderful. I love that chat. Thank you, Nell. Thanks everyone for being here. Yeah, I would encourage you to buy this book. One place you might consider buying it is powells.com, where you can also find Nell's other books. You can also find Justin's books, and you can also find our upcoming list of events.
You should.
Oh, go on.
You should demonstrate. You have a finished copy in your hand, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You should demonstrate the special pain-free binding. Open it up and show how the pages just lie flat.
Like this way?
Like,
can you see? Or like.
See?
It's got the great crystal edge.
Was a deckel edge?
Yeah. Did you not know that?
No.
Yeah.
I don't have a finished copy. This is the tin drum. But I mean, it's so many new American hardbacks are bound with the grain of the paper going the wrong way, so that when you try to open them up, it's like this, like you can barely get the thing open.
Oh.
And I managed to get Knopf to bind my book like a European book. So I'm bringing European culture to the New World. I'm very proud.
It does feel great, I have to say.
Isn't it amazing?
Yeah, and
like you can painlessly hold it up in one hand like this.
Yeah.
Right? See?
You don't have to do the whole this.
Exactly.
It works like
it's a one-handed read.
It really is.
Which sounds pretty bad, actually. You can read this book with one hand. It's a love story.
Yeah, everyone, buy the book. It feels great in one hand. It really does. Well, yeah, thanks again, Justin. Thank you, Nell. Thanks, everyone, for being here. And see you all soon. I'm going to wave.
Bye. Thanks a lot.